on to the next step, which is essentially bringing on board our switches. However, none of those switches have been configured yet. So in our terminal here, we can see that we have a couple of switches ready to go. Open gear 4 here, this switch is actually, I did not want to do that, our fusion switch. So that one's not one that we're going to be working with, but the other 3 are switches that we need to put a base config on and essentially build our underlay and some connectivity away from them to get to Catalyst Center. So that's what we'll get working on now. So as we look to configure these switches, we're going to go back to our diagram here. And for the underlay, all right, which is essentially our global routing table, we are going to have ISIS in play here between the border node control plane and the edge. And we are going to have BGP connections between the border node control plane and the fusion. The initial setup that I'm going to do will temporarily use one of these links. Part of the Catalyst Center flow and process when we create our transits allows us to let it configure these links. However, in order to even get these devices into Catalyst Center, I have to have some sort of network connectivity. So I essentially am walking this across. I'm going to temporarily set up BGP on one link, and then I'm going to get them added, and as I go through my fabric provisioning, we will see that we will automatically configure the other link, and then we'll clear the config on the previous link and push that config down from Catalyst Center as well to bring up our redundancy. Again, the idea here is in a normal environment, we would have 2 border node controller or border node control plane boxes instead of 1, and this edge switch would go across them, and then in addition up above, right, we would have 2 fusion or a stack, right? It could be a stack in the fusion as well that we would cable across for redundancy purposes. On Fabric 2, we don't have a need for any ISIS, right? It's fabric in a box. However, I am going to configure it because, the minute you deploy this and don't have that there, somebody's going to come along and say, hey, we need another switch out there. We're going to create an edge switch, and you're going to need it anyway. So I'm just going to have it in the configuration up front to begin with. So let's go ahead and look at those configs and compare to what we're seeing here. The configuration scripts I've built for the Fabric 1 border, Fabric 1 edge, and the Fabric 2 border are essentially an output of what would happen if you did use LAN automation for this process. So essentially what I do is I set up LAN automation every time a new version of Catalyst Center comes out, let it run, and then I go harvest the configs and I take a look at what it's doing for the underlay so that I can do my underlay manually and not miss anything maybe that they've changed, right? Over the years, there have been things that they've changed in, MTUs and different things like that in the automation, and I just try to follow, what Cisco is doing, knowing that that's how they built it, that's how they want it done. So all of this config is essentially, what you'd get out of LAN automation when you very first a config built. My passwords essentially were, creating a local username, enable secret. I'm creating a loopback. This is that temporary link that I referenced to the fusion. Again, this will go away and it will get replaced and built by Catalyst Center later. These 2 interfaces are the 2 links that will go down to the edge switch here. My IS config, my temporary BGP config up to the Fusion. Now for this, I could indeed just use static routing, right? I could put a default gateway on this guy, route everything up, and likewise put a static route on the Fusion pointing everything back for temporary measures. I'm just going to do it BGP. Really, at the end of the day, the only reason any of this is here is to get that initial connectivity so that we can get to Catalyst Center and add these devices. And then the rest of it pretty basic. Our RP, this gets built and in the underlay anyway, in a larger network where maybe I had two borders. This is going to be an anycast RP, so this same config would exist on the other border as well. Basic PIM stuff, my SNMP stuff, and netconf yang. Fabric 1, more of the same, minus obviously that link to the Fusion, but same loopback. The other side of our links headed up to the border, our ISIS, and so on and so forth. So we'll get started here and start putting this config into our switches. So I had to move my tabs around here. The switches were all out of order. I had to verify that this is indeed my border for Fabric 1. This is my edge, and this is the fabric in a box for Fabric 2. So if I come back to my config here, and I should mention, the only thing I've done on these switches, I may have previously mentioned it, is they have links between each other. It's a full mesh setup in the lab. I've gone in and manually shut down those links that aren't going to be used in this topology. Didn't like the log config stuff, but that's not a big deal. Oh, it's missing the archive log command. Fix that for the rest of them. Right. Should be that one. Lots of silence there, but stuff going on the screen here. So our edge. Now when I'm done with this, I can check ISIS neighbors. I have two of them up, so we know we configured that correctly. And lastly, fabric 2. Oops, went too far. That didn't copy right. There we go. What do we got going on here? Oh, got the command wrong. There we go. That's what we wanted. Okay, so all three of these switches should be configured. Now, we are going to need to configure the other side of the BGP sessions for these switches on the Fusion switch. So I just jumped here in the background, but we do see fabric 2 here, and we see fabric 1 border here. So port 1048 and 2028, we'll notice I don't have any config on. Oops. In fact, they're set for trunks for whatever reason, so I need to reconfigure these with the proper IP addresses and then set up the BGP adjacencies here. So we will default to 2 ports just to make sure nothing gets left behind. We will configure the 2 ports. And again, as I mentioned earlier, these are temporary. This is for temporary connectivity. And if I did this right, which I clearly didn't, one of them's right, the other one is wrong. Let me pause to see what I did here. Okay, probably easier to show you over here. What I did was I accidentally configured the port coming to 101, so 28. It should have been 26 on the Fusion. So I just configured the wrong port there is what I did. Now we can see though, after just moving that IP address from 28 to 26, we have both of our BGP sessions up here. So at this point, if we come back over to one of our borders, we should see that we are indeed receiving a default route from that Fusion. And in addition to that, we're receiving the 199 network, which would obviously subset the default route. I am also learning about my loopback from the edge node here as well. So one of the issues we have at this point is if I try to ping to the internet, I can get there. If I try to ping Catalyst Center, I can get there. But if I ping with a source of my loopback 0, which is what we use to add these devices to Catalyst Center, it is going to fail because these networks here, the loopback network is not advertised yet. So again, temporarily, to get this going, I am going to go into BGP and I am going to forcefully advertise the 10.204.00 WAC 24 and the 10.212.00 WAC 24 that would encompass our loopbacks to get us up and going, and we'll back out that config later. Okay, so what I ended up doing here was just advertising the two loopback interfaces manually. The aggregate didn't work for me, so I'm sure that's a BGP thing and I could figure it out. But again, this is all temporary, so we'll end up removing this once we get the other, once Catalyst Center configures it, which it will do properly. So on the other side over here, we will get into our secondary, our Fabric 2. Here we will do. So now over here on our Fusion, we should see the 204, 1, and 12, and the 212.01 being advertised. Now if I try to ping anywhere, I guess, loopback 0, I can get there. So Catalyst Center should be able to get a hold of these switches. So that does it for the base configuration of our switches. We can now jump back over to Catalyst Center here. And we should be able to add these switches. Now, multiple ways to add switches. We can do a discovery. We can add them manually. In my case here, I'm just going to add them manually via this add device, and we'll add them one by one. Oops, that's not right at all. And again, these credentials we select are what we created in the credentials menu earlier, so they're here pre-populated for me. And we always have to set our netconf port. When I'm done, I like to hit validate. This will tell Catalyst Center to reach out and validate that everything that we had configured is correct. I got green check marks across the board here, so we will click add. Then we will move on and add the second one. Same credentials. Obviously, doing a discovery, I could have done this all kind of in one shot. Validate that guy. Okay, we're not able to get there. This is taking far too long. Let's go take a look at what's going on. I have a feeling this guy, yeah, he's participating in ISIS, but ISIS is not sending him the default route, so he can't really get anywhere. So router, ISIS, default, originate. That should give this guy his default route. Yep. So we will come back over to Catalyst Center, try that again, and I bet it'll work better this time. Yep. There we go. And then our last one. that guy. Give these time to sync. When we get back, they should be all there. Okay, so the 3 switches have been added. We can see them here. Our next step is, of course, to assign them to their actual site. So if I go look at the provision here, right, we can see that none of these have been assigned to a site. That is something that you can do in a discovery, is automatically assign something to the site. Now, when we do this and we assign it to the site and provision it, one of the things that it is going to do is Catalyst Center is going to reach out to Identity Services Engine and add the network device in Identity Services Engine automatically for us with the proper shared secret that I pre-configured in our configurations previously. So what I need to do as well, of course, is make sure that once that provision gets done, right, it's going to push the TACACS config, and from there forward, Catalyst Center is going to need to use TACACS to authenticate to the wireless controller. If I don't configure that, as soon as it starts to go through the provision, it's going to get kicked out and parts of it are going to fail. So over in ISE, I am going to cheat a little bit. Normally this would be, some sort of Active Directory kind of network service account that you would use. I am just going to use an actual built-in ISE account, ISE user, to authenticate these. So here we will create a network access user, call it CatC, give it the same passwords. And then we will create a group, user identity group, call it Cisco admins. We will add our CatC user to that group. Then we need to go to our device administration policy set. I'm just going to use the default for TACACS here. And down here, we need to create the Cisco admin group. Is this the right one? Yes. So basically saying if the user's a part of Cisco admins, permit all commands, permit any command not listed below. And then for our shell profile, we will do a priv15. And that should be all we need to make sure that Catalyst Center will be able to authenticate once TACACS gets pushed. So back over here, I am going to take both Fabric 1 switches, provision. Here I can assign all of them to our floor 1 of the Fabric 1 site. Nothing to do here. I did not mean to click View Docs. Preview that. I'm going to pause because this takes a minute. And then we say next. And I'm going to pause because this also takes a minute. And once it's done, it jumps to here and it shows us what it's going to push. So just as an example, right, we're converting to new style, setting our TACACS source dest. It pushes this WebAuth ACL, which is essentially for wired WebAuth. If we were to use that later for wired guest networking, sets our TACACS servers, our radius server groups, counting authorization method lists, the more radius stuff, CTS for which, later for TrustSec, VTY information. And then here as a note, right, when I did my base configuration, I did not push any NTP or DNS or domain name stuff. So here we can see it is indeed going to push our DNS server, all of that information, and then a certificate for DNAC. So we'll deploy that. I'll go over to the tasks and we will watch that finish. And I will probably pause here because that will take a minute. And here we see that finish successfully. So now if we go back over to our provision inventory page, what we'll notice, right, in the resync after the provision now, we caught our domain name here as well. So that was all pushed. We'll do our second device here. And again, I will pause so we're not watching paint dry here. Next. And I'll pause here again. And that finished, and we'll see here, very much similar config that's going to get pushed. So we will push that and head over to our tasks. And I will pause while that's finishing. Looks like that was done successfully as well. So back to our provision inventory. Now we're all set. So you have to do an initial provision before you can start adding anything to the fabric, right? It's got to be added to a site and provisioned. Now that that has been done, we can start going and looking at setting up our fabric. The first thing I'm going to set up, and I could have set this up previously, is our transit. We need our IP transit that will ultimately connect to the Fusion via BGP. So I will just call this Fusion Transit, and all it wants is the BGP AS number of the Fusion, which I believe is 65413. I'm going to verify that here in the background. Yeah, oh no, 64513. That would have been bad. Next with that, deploy. Next. Going to pause here because it'll probably take a minute. And this is just saying that there's no devices yet. There's no intent. It's just an intent at this point. So we'll finish that. Now we can go to view fabric sites. Of course, we don't have any fabric sites yet. We have to create those first. So here we will actually, let me exit out of this. One other thing we could have done earlier as well. Catalyst Center comes with a default VN and an infra VN. Infra is the underlay VN always. Default is just one that they put here, for you to use if you want. And again, VNs equal VRFs on the switch. So I'm going to create a new one, and I'm just going to call it Corp. Because we will need to add that to our fabrics as we create them. And I'll pause here again. It takes a minute. Save intent and submit that. Now we can go to view fabric sites and create a site. And as we do this, it will ask us from where. So right now I will create Fabric 1 site. We are going to use closed authentication. This is how the network ports, access layer network ports, will get configured. And we're going to go straight to a closed mode authentication.1x deployment. I'm not going to use fabric zones. And deploy that. Here, and I'll pause. And that is done. Then we're going to essentially do the exact same thing for Fabric 2. Notice here Fabric 1 is gone now, right? It won't let me select it. It's already built as a fabric. Skip the zones. Deploy that. Next. And I'll pause again. And we will save that intent. So now if we go into one of our fabric sites, we need to add our VNs to the site. So here we're going to add existing VNs. We're going to use Corp and Infra. The only thing that will ultimately end up going into Infra are our wireless APs. And we will save that intent. We go back over to Fabric 2. Add the same VRFs, VNs. Pause here. And save that. So now we've got our VNs. If we go back to Fabric 1 and we look, we will see that automatically our two devices here have shown up. So we have our border node and our edge node, and we just need to add the roles to them. However, for the border node, we have some work we need to do. This is where we created that transit earlier. So we're going to enable our layer 3 handoff. Our local AS, it's already pre-populated. Oops, didn't mean to click that. We're going to add our fusion transit. That is what we created earlier, the transit we created. And then in the IP pool, which again, we created these earlier, we're going to choose from this transit IP pool. Then we have to tell it what interface we're going to configure this transit on. So here, we need to find that interface. Our current one is on 102, so we want TE101 as our link back up to the fusion for this transit. So here, 101, and I'm going to turn on both of these, right? So it's back to my comment about the temporary links that I set up. That would essentially be the link for the infra VN. Here, I normally just use some VLANs, we'll say 3001 and 3002 for these. And you'll notice I cannot populate these fields because I chose the IP pool, and it's going to populate those for me. So I will save that. We'll add this. We also want this to be a control plane node. Now this is something we did not have an option for in the previous video. The 3850 is Lisp BGP only, as opposed to the 9300, which we can do Lisp pub sub. I'm not going to get into big details between this, but that is a change from the previous video. Once that's done, we can go ahead and add this. Later, we will come back and make this the embedded wireless controller once we have all the fabric up and running and tested, and worry about the wired stuff first here, and then we'll come back and do wireless. So I will add that. We'll click on this guy. We will make him an edge node only. We'll add that. And then we will deploy this. And I will pause here because this is going to take a minute. And it failed out on me, but it did tell me exactly why. So we need to go re-provision all these devices before we can do this. So I'm going to discard this completely. Kind of a pain. But back to our provision inventory. And I'm just going to select all three of these and go through a new provision. And I'm going to pause here. And now it's going to let us deploy. And we will go watch that over here. While that runs, I'll take you over to ISE here. One of the other things, right, I like to check, I check this in the background, but under our TACACS live logs, we can see that Catalyst Center is indeed using those credentials and logging into the switches. Looks like that finished. So now we will head back over to our fabric sites. And we will try to do this again. So our border node, layer 3 handoff, add our transit pool, add our external interface, 3001, 3002, control plane, add. Something I didn't mention earlier, right, and we'll see it in Fabric 2, is that we'll select all three of these, right? It'll be all in one, and then eventually the wireless controller as well. So it'll be doing all of that on the single switch. Whereas here we've got our border node control plane on this switch, and then our edge node down here on this switch. And let's try this again. I'm going to pause here. So that all went through. We can see it is going to do a lot of things, right? We're creating our Corp VRF, creating our VLAN 3001, 3002, changing TE101 to a trunk, the SVI for 3001, the SVI for 3002, some prefix list stuff, route maps, Lisp, BGP, right? Sets up our neighbors. So we'll deploy that. I'm just going to open this up in a new window. And we'll watch that go. But while we do, we are going to go back here and go to Fabric 2. And we are going to set this guy up. Again, automatically pulled that from the existing config. Fabric 2 transit, external interface. I do have to figure out what this is. So that is going to be 1047, gigabit 1047. So I might as well just scroll here. Add these. Now, here I cannot use 3001 and 3002 because on my Fusion, when I create those interfaces to match, I want to make sure that they are different, right? Two different fabrics, two different sets of VLANs. So here I am going to use 3011 and 3012. Whoops, not 30,012. That wouldn't work. I'm going to go control plane and edge node. Before I deploy this, let's go look and see if this guy is done yet. Looks like it is. It was successful. And I should be able to deploy this one now. And this config is going to be very simple, just different IP addresses. So we will deploy that and watch it over here. Like that finished, and that's successful. So our fabrics are built. The piece we need to worry about now is to create our BGP peers on our Fusion for those new peers that we just created on both border nodes. This is where once we bring those up, I can then go ahead and tear down and tear out all of my temporary connectivity that I had, and then provision those ports, provision, I guess, configure those ports as the redundant links through our fabric. So we'll head back over to our Fusion here. So a couple of things of note here, right? The Fusion doesn't get configured automatically by Catalyst Center. If it's a switch, you can certainly, add it to Catalyst Center, and you could create the configuration scripts, using Jinja velocity, whatever that would, push the proper config given your inputs. But a Fusion device, sometimes it's a firewall, sometimes it's a switch, sometimes it's a router. It doesn't need to do anything other than make sure that the routing is there correctly. Another note here, if I jump back over to my Fabric 1, we can see what was all done, right? So some of this we did. We pushed this neighbor. That's our temporary that we'll get rid of. We pushed these two. Those were also temporary that we'll get rid of. But Catalyst Center, when it came in, it created my new neighbor for the default underlay or default routing table, 3002, which to keep in mind, right, we used 3001 and 2. It used 3002 as the underlay or global routing table. It added a whole bunch of additional, neighbor information with a route map for Lisp and different things like that. Then it also added the, VRF corp, which we saw, but then also the neighbor for corp. So what I'm doing here isn't something you would typically do in an environment, right? I'm taking a VRF, which is there to be kept separate for the most part, and I'm peering it to the global routing table on the Fusion. So at the end of the day, right, these two VRFs, the underlay and this corp, are going to be routed together. In a lot of cases, right, this goes to a firewall or something else, and the underlay is completely separate, and they don't, just route to each other through the Fusion. But for lab here, that's what I'm doing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on when we talk about SDA transit and, the effect of that. So if I go back over to my Fusion, we have to first create all the VLANs that we're going to peer with. So here we've got the Fabric 1 Corp, the Fabric 1 underlay, the Fabric 2 Corp, and the Fabric 2 underlay, the 3001, 2, 11, and 12. Then we need the interfaces for those. and then we need to add our BGP peers for all of those, which I must have the wrong IP. Yes, that's going to be 1, not 2. There we go. Take a look at that quick. So here we can see, right, I don't have a Corp VRF here. If I created the Corp VRF and put 3001 and 3011 in that VRF, right, it would be completely isolated. It would not have, unless, I did a route leak up here on the Fusion to get it back into the global routing table. It wouldn't have any internet access. It wouldn't have access to, identity services engine, etc., which it doesn't necessarily need because, of course, the switch is going to be sourcing all of that traffic. But nonetheless, that would cut us off from the rest of the network if I were to create that VRF here. So we can see we've got our neighbor for 1.1, 1.5, 212.15.11. I feel like I'm missing. Oh no, they're both there. Okay, 5, and then 212.1 and 212.5. So those should be there. Now the next thing I need to do is make sure that the ports that VLAN 3001, 211, and 12 are on are going to be, configured as trunk ports here just to match the other end where Catalyst Center configured it. So if we look at our sheet here, we should be looking at 1028 and 1047. So if I come back over here, 47. So 47 is correct, but it's shut down. Oops. And that theoretically should have brought up those BGP peers. So we have a peer to 204.11, 204.15, our temporary 212.11, 212.15. Looks like this guy is not up yet. Maybe it came up in the background. I was too quick. Yep. So all of those came up. So we are good there. Now, at this point, we can start to back out our other config for our BGP neighbor. I should be able to take that original neighbor down and start to remove some of that config. So in here, no neighbor, that was going to be this one. One, 2.1.18. Those were our temporary neighbors. Now that those are down, let's see what we see here. Looks like everything is still there. Now, granted, these are being advertised because I manually advertised them, but everything else looks good there. So now on the other side, we should be able to clean this up as well. So here is Fabric 2. And I will say here we should be able to get rid of the neighbor 10, 212, 117. And that should do it there. I should also be able to get rid of my network statement. This is the one that I manually added, I believe. Yep, so now that's down and gone. We still are receiving our routes from the Fusion. And over here, are we still seeing the 10 to 12.01? Nope, so I must need to leave that in there because I just disconnected myself from Catalyst Center. So back over here. Network 10 to 12.01. Yep, it's back. Okay. But then over here, we'll go remove those as well. No neighbor 10 204.117. Good. Nothing to do on this guy. So we are set there. We should be able to go back over to Catalyst Center now and take a look at the network there and make sure everything's still reachable. Maybe do a resync on the devices, being that I did just go make some changes locally to them. Inventory. And we'll just give all of these a resync. And resync will just tell Catalyst Center to go out and check for any net new config or changes local. If I don't do that, eventually the we'll get an error on the compliance where the config on Catalyst Center is not in sync with the config on the device locally. So speaking of resyncing, the next thing we need to do, if you recall, we were walking this across, we need to go reconfigure the second leg, which is yet again going to involve more BGP connections and additional VLANs up here on the Fusion, but we'll go ahead and get that squared away. Now, first thing I have to do is get rid of the configuration on my port 16 here. No, that's down to the other one, my port 2 here, 18. So I am going to go in here. I'm going to do a default interface gig 102. Oops, that's TE, which is going to set it to its default config. And then on Fusion or Fabric 2, we will also default interface gig Ethernet 1048. We'll write that. Now, because I made these changes locally, right, Catalyst Center doesn't know about them yet. If I was to go try to build those transits now, it would fail because it thinks that the interface is configured like this. So when we go back over to Catalyst Center here, we'll yet again do another resync here, just so that it now knows that those ports are no config and don't have an IP on them, and it can overwrite them and configure them appropriately. So I'm going to pause to wait for that sync to get done. It'll take a couple of minutes. Okay, now that those are indeed synced here, we can go back to our fabric. And we'll go into Fabric 1. We'll go to our border. We're going to go to configure the border node here, and now we're going to add another interface. And again, if you recall, this typically wouldn't go to the same switch. It would go to a separate switch, right, for redundancy. Again, you'll notice TE101 is gone. We've already used it, so it's excluded it from the list. And here we're going to go 3003 and 3004. Can't set the IP. We'll save that. Now you can see we've got the two links here. We're going to add that, deploy it. Pause here. Okay, and we can see very similar to when we did this the first time, creating the VLANs. We're now telling this 102 interface go to a trunk, creating the SVIs, same prefix list, adding the new peers to BGP, which of course we'll have to configure over on the Fusion once this is done. So we'll deploy that. And I will pull up my tasks in another window and we'll wait for that to finish. But while we do, we will go to Fabric 2 and we will do the same here. So we're going to add an interface. Which should be 1048. Notice 47 is missing. And this is going to be 2013 and 2014 because we were 11 and 12 before. We will save this. We will add it. We'll add that. We'll check this. This is just me being careful. I don't like to push multiple things at the same time. It shouldn't cause any issue, but nonetheless, I like to make sure one finishes before the other. And I'll pause here. More of the same with the config here, creating the new VLANs. And we will watch for this. I'll pause here. And that was done successfully. So now we need to come back over here to our Fusion again and get those interfaces configured and the new BGP peers up on those. So in my Fusion, we will do a config for all of this, create our new VLANs. Oops, I made the names identical. I got to fix that. Just added a 1 to the end of them. Create our SVIs for those interfaces. And then do our BGP changes. And then lastly, we got to go fix up those interfaces, even though they're coming up somehow, probably using the other link, the wrong link. But we'll fix that up. So if we look back at our sheet here, we're looking at 26 and 48, I believe. They should have static IPs on them, right? Or layer 3 properties right now. And 48. trunks. And again, this is redundancy. Typically, we wouldn't have, I kind of keep beating this to death, but wouldn't have the two links to the same switch, right? This would either be a stack up here and it would be across the stack, or it would be two completely, individual switches, however it's configured. But this is a little weird with the redundancy, just due to the fact that it's lab. So now if we look at our BGP, we shouldn't see anybody down. Everybody's up and configured. So we are now in a position where all of our northbound connectivity out of the fabric, right, as we look at this, essentially everything inside of these switches is the fabric. This is essentially leaving the fabric. And as I mentioned earlier, right, I'm dropping the corporate VRF right into the default VRF here, so it's all routed together. Everybody should be able to talk to everybody. They're just going to hairpin through this fusion switch. So as an example, if I've got a wireless access point here on the default or infra VRF, or the default routing table, and a Windows box in the corp VRF, they'll be able to, it'll be able to ping, but it's going to come up, hairpin through, come back down to get there, just to leave the VRF, leave the fabric, and come all the way back in that scenario. So now that that's done, we should be able to go start configuring some actual networks in Catalyst Center. So when we look at our fabrics, right, today it's built, it's functioning, but there's nothing there for, networks, anycast gateways, SVIs for clients if they were to come on the network. So here, I'm going to create an anycast gateway. It's going to go in the corp VRF, and I can do multiples of these at once. So here, again, these pools we created earlier and it's, reserved for this site, so they all show up here. So we're going to take our data pool, we're going to call it data, and we're going to make it VLAN. Did I put that on the sheet over here? No, but data will be VLAN 10. We'll just match the third octet of the, we're going to add another one. We will make that our voice network. VLAN 11, we will mark it as such. And I think that should be all we need right now. Corp Wireless will get assigned to the wireless SID. It doesn't need to be here. Actually, yes, it does. So we'll add that. Nothing else needs to come here. So this Corp Wireless, what was that guy? 12. So we'll make it VLAN 12. We're going to check the box for fabric enabled wireless. And those are going to be the three here. I'll pause here. And then here we can see our config. Created some loopback interfaces, made some updates to our BGP, right? Because now we're aggregating the network, those three networks, and advertising them up to our Fusion. And then what you'll notice on the edge switch, once its configuration generates here, it is actually going to create the SVIs on the edge. So down here, you'll see it creates VLAN 10, 11, and 12, and we get the interface VLANs for those. One thing to note here, if you remember when we did our settings and I set the created these scopes and I set the DHCP server and the default gateway when I reserved them, that is where it pulled this info from. So this was the IP I entered for the gateway there. This is what I entered for DHCP, which is our Windows server. We'll obviously have to go configure those DHCP scopes here after a bit, but it does indeed create those on the edge. So if I had multiple edges, these are anycast gateways. This gateway will exist on all of my edge switches from that perspective. Then we've done a bunch of configuration on the ports and the Lisp information. We'll go ahead and deploy this. I'll pull this tab over here and we'll watch it here. I'll pause till that gets done. So that finished successfully. Now back over here, we are going to go back to our Fabric site. We need to add yet another network, but this time to the infra VN. So here you can see our anycast gateways. We're going to create another one, this time in the infra VN. And for here, this is going to be the access points. You'll notice we don't have as many options, and really the pool type, all we get are Fabric APs and extended nodes. So I will call this APs, VLAN 4, and that's all we need to do there. So when I'm done with this, I obviously need to go do this very same thing for Fabric 2, only as I just discussed with Fabric 2, all of the SVIs and everything else, the BGP, it's all going to go on one switch, right? Because it's a fabric in a box. So we'll wait for this to finish, deploy it, let it run in the background, go over to Fabric 2, add our anycast gateways here first for the Corp VRF, and we'll add our data. We will add our voice. And we will add our Corp wireless. It was 12, right? Just to make sure. Yeah. And this is checked for fabric enabled wireless. We'll go ahead and deploy that. We'll come over to our activities and tasks and watch those guys go. The first one finished. This one is running. I'll pause till it finishes. And it looks like we're good there. So now we're going to go back and we are going to add that AP pool over here. In the infra VRN. VLAN 4. And I'll pause here. And I'm just not going to wait for this to finish. The deploy is available, so we'll submit that. We'll wait for that to finish here. And we can see that finished. So we now should have a fully usable network, with the exception of we don't have any DHCP services yet. So